I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a major address by the Secretary of State, John Kerry, laying out in great detail, in a speech that lasted more than an hour, a justification for the administration's decision to withhold its veto and thereby permitting a United Nations Security Council resolution to pass 14-0, defining Israeli settlements anywhere on the West Bank as having no legal validation and a flagrant violation of international law. The U.S. action in the Security Council, as I'm sure many of you know, created a virtual firestorm in the Jewish community and in Israel. The feeling that it's almost universal, the feeling that's universal throughout the Jewish world, is that the administration's action was inappropriate and uncalled for. And obviously, those feelings were heard within the administration. And so today, Secretary of State Kerry went before the American people and, in a nationally televised speech, tried to explain why the administration chose to abstain and permit Resolution 2334 to be passed. I watched every moment of the speech, and I simply want to share with you my personal reaction. And then I want you to hear from a number of Jewish leaders for their reactions as well. But from my perspective, I came away feeling that John Kerry means well. I don't believe he's out to hurt Israel. I don't believe he's anti-Israel. He spoke movingly about his personal experiences with and in Israel. I certainly don't believe he's anti-Semitic. John Kerry is neither anti-Israel nor anti-Semitic. And I also feel he made a very strong case for the administration's position, which is that the only way there will ever be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and between Israel and the Arab world, will be through a two-state solution. And that Israeli settlement policy, Israeli settlement expansion deep into the West Bank, and Israeli settlement policy as articulated by the right in the Israeli government, sends a message to the Palestinians that Israel is not serious about ever implementing a two-state solution, and is making it more and more difficult for there ever to be a Palestinian state on contiguous territory on the West Bank. And because the Netanyahu government has been unwilling to stop settlement construction, especially beyond the main settlement blocks in what's called Area C, where the majority of settlers currently reside, and which is designated to become a part of Israel in any two-state solution. Because the Netanyahu government has been unwilling to cease settlement construction and are planning on adding Israeli housing in East Jerusalem, which Secretary Kerry made very clear the United States considers to be the West Bank. For these reasons, Kerry argued, President Obama decided to withhold a U.S. veto and to permit the resolution to be passed, branding all settlements, including those in Area C, including those in East Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Western Wall, to be illegal and a flagrant violation of international law. Sloan, I want to take a look at Article 1 of the Security Council resolution. It reads, the resolution reaffirms the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law and a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution and a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Now, this was the thrust of Secretary Kerry's speech. And it was very seductive. If you didn't know the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you were ignorant of 80 years of history that has characterized the Arab-Palestinian rejectionism of the intrinsic right of the Jewish people to live in a Jewish state anywhere in Palestine, if you don't know this transcending, tragic truth, you could be swayed by the idealism and the fairness of John Kerry's defense of the Obama administration. John Kerry said the resolution is even-handed because it also calls for a cessation of incitement and violence by both sides. Both sides? How outrageous is it to suggest a moral equivalency between the Palestinians and Israel when it comes to incitement, terrorism, and murder? By the way, while Israel is criticized by name over and over throughout the resolution, the word Palestinian does not appear one time, not even once, in the entire resolution, except for a reference to, quote, Palestinian territory being occupied by the State of Israel. Is that a fair or balanced resolution? The Palestinians are not referred to ever in the entire resolution. And Secretary Kerry makes it sound as if incitement and violence and terrorism are inappropriate. But he does not make them sound horrific and anathema. What's worse? We should ask Secretary Kerry, what's worse? A community of Jews living near the Jordan River, or Palestinians slitting the throat of a baby while she sleeps in her bed, or driving cars and trucks into civilians waiting at a bus stop? Are settlements problematic? They very well may be. But they do not rise to the level of Palestinians teaching their children that Jews are the descendants of pigs and apes, of Palestinian Authority television teaching children to sing songs of murdering Jews, of teaching children to chant, from the river to the sea, all of Palestine will be free. John Kerry's speech was seductive because it made it sound as if two parties were simply unable to work out a peaceful compromise because one was calling the other names while the other was undermining any possibility of a compromise by building settlements. That's why John Kerry's speech, as lovely as it sounded, was insidious, even if he meant well. And I believe he did. Which is why it's more important than ever for Americans, not simply American Jews, for Americans who understand the truth of the Middle East for what it is, namely a tragic situation where Palestinians will not agree to share the land with the Jews, no matter how many times the Jews offer to share the land, and present a plan to the Palestinians by which they give up 90% of the West Bank, not once, twice, more. By the way, that Secretary Kerry never mentioned. The ideology that fuels the Arab-Islamic hatred for the infidel, especially the Jewish infidel, that's never mentioned. And that's why Palestinians are unable to call Israel the Jewish state. Even where there's a hint that Palestinian leadership might be willing to work out a two-state solution, it is never two states for two peoples. While the Jews have said they would help create and upbuild a state for the Palestinians, acknowledging it is a state for and of Palestinians. The Palestinians have been unwilling to even acknowledge the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own. If the Middle East were as John Kerry saw it, he might be right. But John Kerry does not see the reality that has stared American administrations in the face for nearly 70 years. From the moment the State of Israel was declared by David Ben-Gurion, and even before that, the Arab Palestinian does not want to share the land of Palestine with the Jews, and all the rest is commentary. And that's the human tragedy of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And however problematic settlements may be, they are not the issue. Were Israel to pull every settler off the West Bank tomorrow, do any of you watching JBS right now believe for one moment the Palestinians would then stop their incitement or violence, terrorism, murder, the rockets, the tunnels? They would make peace with Israel? Do any of you watching JBS right now believe that? And that's why the words of John Kerry, however lofty, idealistic, beautiful they may have sounded, they are hollow and very, very sad. It's so sad that the Obama administration should leave office slamming Israel. The only democracy, the only liberal democracy in the entire Middle East, America's closest ally, sharing with America all of its values and its dreams, trying desperately to work out a life of peace for Israelis and for Arabs and Palestinians. John Kerry's words may have been beautiful, but more than finding them beautiful, I found them very, very sad. Sad that this is how our administration, how the Obama administration views the tragedy of the Middle East and just wants to make Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli Knesset and the government, and by extension the Israeli people. I remind you, the Israeli government was democratically elected by the Israeli people. There's no democracy in the Palestinian world. There's no democracy in the Arab world. So for me, while I understood what Kerry was trying to do, I don't think he's a bad man. I don't think he's anti-Israel. He's not anti-Semitic. He just reflects a worldview of the Obama administration that is so myopic. And while he says the resolution is not one-sided, it's even-handed, neither the resolution nor the Obama administration is currently even-handed. Now that's my take on the Kerry speech. We want you to hear others. And I'm going to begin by going to Israel to speak with a man who's eloquent in his explanation of the State of Israel and representation of the State of Israel. And he happens to be a dear friend. He is the former Israeli Ambassador to the United States, Danny Ayalon. Danny, thank you so much for giving us some time.
Always my pleasure, Mark.
Danny, I want to hear what your reaction has been to both the resolution that the United States permitted to be passed in the UN Security Council, and then I want to hear what you feel about John Kerry's speech today, which I know you watched, you saw, you understand what it says, and you know what? You answer those questions any way you want.
Well, thank you, Mark. First of all, I really appreciate your opening words. I think they were very wise. I think they were very true. As to the resolution, I think it has been a long-standing tradition of the United States to defend Israel in the Security Council from all those who gang up on her. The Security Council, just as the United Nations, is not a leveled playing field for Israel. Israel has been discriminated against over there. It's a very biased, bigoted organization with this Arab automatic majority. So the decent...
Danny Ayalon, we'll try to get him back on the phone. While we're waiting, I am joined by someone now you well know on JBS, Tisha Bader, who does the JBS News Date every single day. And you had a wonderful explanation of what the Kerry speech was all about. Can you, from your perspective, summarize what you understand Kerry to be saying?
I agree with you that he means well.
Yeah?
He was very much defending the U.S. position and speaking about how much the U.S. has been supportive of Israel over the years, stressing that responding to the criticism from Israel, basically, saying that it's not just about the settlements. He did speak out against terrorism and incitement. And he even says settlements are not the main obstacle to peace. Of course they're not the main obstacle to peace. If they were gone tomorrow, of course there would still be an issue. And yet, he keeps referring back to them over and over again. And he basically says they are one of the main obstacles to peace.
Forgive me for interrupting you. Danny is back on our line. Danny, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm sorry we lost you. Okay, you were start again. Our viewers are watching you all over America. And you were saying that ultimately the United Nations is not an even playing field and it's not a place that's hospitable to Israel. But go on and talk about the resolution, and we're very anxious to hear how you felt about Kerry's speech.
Yes, so again, about this resolution, again, it was one-sided, and I think you were very correct about analyzing it. The United States not only thought it was the decent thing to do to defend Israel and to level the playing fields and protect it from all the bigotry over there, but also realizing that a Security Council resolution that would be one-sided will lock the Palestinians into a more intransigent position, so they will never have any incentive to compromise and to sit and negotiate. At the same time, it pushes Israel into a corner, so it will not be able to compromise. So actually it's going to be a destructive thing for peace and not the opposite. Also, I think from the United States perspective, also they wanted to keep the United Nations out of the process, knowing that the United Nations was never effective, never constructive. Quite the contrary. The United Nations has never endorsed or accepted the peace treaty we had with Egypt or with Jordan, again, because of this automatic majority against us. Also, where the long-standing American position was, from American interest, that bringing in the UN to the process is moving out the United States, losing a lot of leverage and prestige. This is why I really think it was a major, major mistake to allow this resolution to pass and not veto it. So it wasn't rational.
Okay. By the way,
more, I would say, emotional.
Danny, did it come as a surprise to you, or did Israel know it was coming?
Well, it was a stunning surprise for the reasons that we know. In order to further peace, or in order to engage with the sit down directly, without preconditions, and certainly without this international tribunal that is judging Israel.
Okay.
And,
Okay, so
yes.
What was your reaction in general? I have specific questions for you about things that Kerry said in his speech. But first, I just want your overall impression, your reaction. You're watching in Israel. What are you thinking to yourself?
Well, I would say that out of the 70-minute speech, the vast majority was about settlements.
Of course.
And again, this is a misreading of reality. Israel has offered more than once removal of settlements. We removed settlements out of Gaza in a very, excruciatingly painful process here in Israel. We did that, but we never got peace. Quite the contrary. The Palestinians were never asked or demanded to make their own concessions vis-a-vis Jerusalem, vis-a-vis refugees, vis-a-vis security issues, vis-a-vis recognition of Israel. The crux of the matter is that the Palestinians, till this day, have not recognized Israel's right to determine itself as a Jewish state.
By the way,
talk about a two-state.
Danny,
Yes.
during Kerry's speech, he said that during the Oslo process, the PLO did recognize Israel as the Jewish state. Is Kerry correct?
Not at all. Not only they did not recognize Israel as a Jewish state, but also the supposedly annulment of the Palestinian charter bent on destruction of the Jewish state has not been really legally annulled. It was only, again, some maneuvers which were tactical and not something which is legally binding by the Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
Or the Palestinian charter.
Okay.
And
hold on one second.
And on top of that,
yeah.
yes, and on top of that, when the Palestinians say, and Abu Mazen said that in 1,000 years he will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state.
Yes.
This is very telling.
Yes.
That tells that he doesn't recognize our rights here, that he still teaches, and he does, teaches children at school that we are occupiers, colonialists, and they are taught to demand not only the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, but also the Galilee and the Negev and Tel Aviv and Haifa. All this was not mentioned.
Yes.
So, in a way, it was just a taking completely the Palestinian talking points and trying to beautify them, but in effect putting all the onus on Israel and not on the Palestinians, and this will never bring peace.
Okay. By the way, it's my fault. I asked you a specific question about the speech. My first question, and you can say to me, you can dance around this if you want. You're a very skilled politician. What I really asked you was, how do you feel about it? I want you to understand, I'm listening to this speech here in New York, and I'm saying to myself, you know, he's making a very lovely case, but at the same time, it was infuriating to me. And I want to know, as you're watching this, Danny, again, you're approaching this from a totally different level than the average Jew in New York. But were you getting angry? Did it make you sad when you heard me use the word seductive? Did you understand what I meant for the American who is now watching the Secretary of State make it sound as if there really is no issue if Israel would only stop building settlements? What was your reaction to it inside you?
Well, just as you said, seductive and actually not truthful, trying to paint a picture as if Israel is the obstacle to peace, or if, or that the settlements are, not mentioning or failing to mention that for the last almost 100 years, from Balfour Declaration through the Peel Commission, through the 181 resolution of the General Assembly of the UN in 1947, through Camp David in 2000, Annapolis 2008, the disengagement from Gaza, evacuation of settlements in 2005, the freezing of settlements by Netanyahu in 2010.
Yes.
All these attempts by Israel to really almost bend over backwards towards the Palestinians, and the response was ever more tough positions by the Palestinians, never really willing to compromise. And if you look at the starting positions of Israel and the Palestinians back in 93 when Oslo began, you see how the Israelis moved almost all the way towards the Palestinians. But they have not budged an inch. Their position now is the same position as their starting one in 1993. All this was not mentioned in Kerry's speech.
You're absolutely
and this is why it was very deceiving.
Okay. And I assume at some level it was upsetting to you. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want you to address the main theme because, again, look, Americans all over the country are listening to you right now here on JBS. And I saw you interviewed by CNN. They gave you maybe, 120 seconds, maybe they gave you 3 minutes and then they cut you off. I want you here to answer the American who says, without any malicious intent, when I hear that the Secretary of State described how Israel is building settlements deep into the West Bank, closer to the Jordan River than to the state of Israel. And he's pointing out that how can there ever be a contiguous Palestinian state if there are Israeli settlement enclaves all throughout the West Bank? It sounds like a legitimate criticism of the state of Israel. He also used numbers that were very powerful. The number of settlers who have been added to the West Bank since Oslo, since the Netanyahu government came into power, and since the Obama administration also came into power. It sounds as if, even if everything else is as you and I see it, at the same time, the settlements are a legitimate impediment, not necessarily the impediment, but that they seem to be problematic. Is there anything you would have us understand, or do you simply say the same thing? Yes, settlements are problematic, but they are not the issue. There are bigger issues, but yes, they are problematic. Danny, what do you say?
Well, first of all, I would say that when Jews return to their homeland, it cannot be problematic. Secondly, I would say that until 1967, there wasn't even one settlement, and yet there was terror, there was incitement, there was attempts to throw Israel into the sea all the time.
Except Danny, people would say to you, yes, but that was before Oslo. From Oslo on, it's a different story.
Right, but Oslo also says that the settlement is but one issue among few others: Jerusalem, refugees, security measures, defensible borders for Israel, recognition issue, and all these things have to be solved simultaneously. You cannot just single out one. Now, since the Palestinians time and again refuse to deal with all the other issues of recognition, of security to Israel, stop the incitement and stop the terror. Jerusalem, when they want still now exclusivity over our holiest places, whether it's the Temple Mount or the Western Wall, all these things have managed actually to not giving us any incentives vis-a-vis the settlements.
I understand.
There are a few 100,000 Israelis who live there, and we cannot stop their livelihood and living conditions just and waiting for the Palestinians to oblige us and sit with us for the negotiation table.
I understand.
The Palestinians have, yeah.
I understand. And by the way, that is, it seems to me, the position Israel is taking. There are going to be some Americans who that explanation doesn't solve the problem for them. I want to ask you about another thing that Kerry said. Kerry also said that this is the most right-wing government in Israeli history, and he said it as a criticism. A, do you agree this is the most right-wing government the State of Israel has ever had? And how do you feel about the fact that it's said as a criticism of Israel?
Well, that also, I would say, defies the American values and belief in democracy.
Yes.
This is a democratically elected government of Israel.
Yes.
And also, I believe it was quite arrogant from him, for him, to lecture Israel what is good for its future, for its security, for its survival. I think also it is wrong to say that the two-state solution is the only solution, and a one-state solution is something that will make Israel decide whether it's Jewish or democratic. This is not the case. There are many, many other solutions in between, and certainly at this point, when Israel cannot really allow the Palestinians to get everything that they want, especially in light of the geopolitical situation in the region, where we see the Arab world going up in flames, where we see ISIS, Iran threatening us, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas and Hezbollah, all those are also in the West Bank, not just in Gaza, not just in Lebanon. And the fact that they do not kill Israelis on a daily basis is only because our presence there, our security presence there. So we have to see a total change of culture among the Palestinians before we can move forward. I would say that they could challenge us and they could challenge the settlements once they agree and really accept our rights, our inherited rights to be in our homeland. If this will be the case, then we can talk about the settlements, and the settlements are reversible, as we have proven in the case of Gaza.
Very well said. One last question. There's now this issue going around. Was the United States really instrumental in having this resolution brought to the Security Council, or was it done by other countries? They may have, in fact, consulted America, but America was not in any way a driving force. From your Israeli perspective, whatever you've heard or know from within Israel, does Israel feel that the United States was complicit, I should say? Was it complicit in making this, bringing this resolution before the Security Council, or, as Kerry claimed today, was the United States an innocent bystander who then decided to let the resolution pass? Which is it, Danny?
Well, Mark, I would say that it's been known that Israeli information, Israeli statements have always been very credible, have always been very reliable. More than that, if the Prime Minister of Israel is willing to stick out his neck and go on record saying, basically to the effect that there was a collusion here between the United States, the State Department, and the Palestinians, then I think it's very believable. If you look at the fact that just in the last few weeks, there were intensive talks, including high-level visit of Palestinians in the White House, in the State Department, then I guess the evidence is quite compelling.
Okay. Danny, it is wonderful that you always give us so much time, and I'm thrilled that I can give you the time. I wish other networks in America gave you the same amount of time, because what you do in explaining the overall situation is so wonderful for us as Americans to hear. It is so lovely of you to wait up this late at night in Israel. I thank you, my friend. I hope to see you very soon here in the United States.
Thank you very much. And Mark, if I can ask you one favor.
Sure.
And that is, the Truth About Israel, which is
Your series.
It's a non-profit.
Yes.
That's defending Israel, especially in the social media.
Yes.
We're starting next week a very special campaign, and I would love to do it also on your Facebook of the JBS. That would be really an honor for us.
It will be. I will be honored to promote it. We'll call you off camera and work it out, and it'll be my pleasure, Danny. Thank you very much for all you do for Israel and for Amcha, for the Jewish people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And always remember, Am Israel Chai.
Am Israel Chai, my friend. Thank you. The thoughts of Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States. We go immediately to someone else who you well know here on JBS, who has been fabulous in leading world Jewry from within inside the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the executive chairman, Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be with you. I wish better circumstances.
I do too.
And I agree with everything Danny Ayalon, even though I only heard part of what he said.
Okay.
He's a great voice and a voice of moderation who is able to clarify issues, I think, in a unique way.
So I want to know your reaction to, we're talking first about the Kerry speech. I know that you were also involved today with the whole issue of the resolution, and you can refer to that any way you want, but I really want to know, you're watching the speech. Malcolm, what was in your heart as you watched it?
I had hopes for what the speech would do. I knew that he would try to explain the reasons why the United States abstained, and I was looking for something that would have helped restore the balance and put us back on track. I think that overall he actually may have exacerbated the problem in the emphasis that he put on the settlement issue, after acknowledging that it is not the primary cause for the reason or the main reason why the peace hasn't been achieved or for the conflict. Acknowledging that and then going to such detail about the settlement issue, as opposed, and I understand that they're critical and they can express their criticisms, but the balance between that and this sort of equation between the terrorism, violence, murder on the side of the Palestinians and the building of houses in the disputed territory.
Yes.
And that's one. Two, I found that the failure to put the onus on the Palestinians, while even naming the Israeli ambassador to UN, coming out with specific people, which I thought was rather unusual, to not say there was a Nakba. They claim, the Palestinians, but why was there as a Nakba? Because the Arabs rejected the peace agreement. Why all the negotiations, all the opportunities to have resolved these issues came to naught because the Palestinians refused it. They refused it with Prime Minister Barak. They refused it with Prime Minister Olmert. They refused the president's own initiative, which till today they have not responded to. Where was that? Where was this in the speech saying to the Palestinians, you walked away, you caused these problems not to be resolved because you refused to negotiate? And that the danger of the resolution is, there are many, but one in particular is that this gives the Palestinians the notion that you never have to sit down and talk. You can continue to go to international fora, put the pressure on Israel, try to build the pressure, get more and more countries on board. Even the United States abstaining on this resolution that was so one-sided and sending the message to them, don't talk, don't negotiate, you don't have to take responsibility because you will get it delivered. And I hope that the Secretary's remark today that there are countries that want to go there to get recognition of Palestinian state and resolve the issues, this is not our way. Well, I want to know that the United States is going to veto any efforts like that between now and January 20th. Then it'll be the next administration's responsibility.
Okay. By the way, you didn't hear my open. I said, on the one hand, I found the speech very seductive because if you didn't know the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it sounded so benign. You have two sides, they disagree. One side is guilty of a little bit of incitement. Malcolm, I don't know if you noticed, in the actual resolution passed by the UN Security Council, while Israel is referred to over and over again, the word Palestinian is not once mentioned in that resolution. The Palestinians are never held accountable by name in this resolution. And what the Secretary of State suggested was, Malcolm, the right-wing Israeli government, the most right-wing Israeli government Israel has ever had, has brought this on itself. It gave the Obama administration no choice but to let this resolution pass because Israel had to be told, a friend had to be told, your behavior is unacceptable. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I agree with him that friends have to tell friends the truth, but not in the Security Council, not in a body that has shown its bias, its complete distortion, its complete one-sidedness. And you bring our friends to be whipsawed and to face a vote of that kind, and the applause that followed it, which was so demeaning of the body and of Israel, after the United States abstained and it passed 14-0. I'm not saying all the right is on one side or all the wrong is on another side, but the fact is that you did not have in this, not only, as you pointed out rightly, no mention of the Palestinians, no ascribing of the responsibility of the Palestinians, which is why I mentioned that they walked away from every talk. How come in a discussion of refugees you don't hear mention of the Jewish refugees from Arab countries? Right. 900,000 Jews. Congress passed that when officials are speaking about one refugee problem, they should talk of the other. Why didn't he mention that the Jewish refugees, who were absorbed by a nascent state while the others were kept in camps and as political pawns, and now talks about their return and solving it without changing the Jewish character? But that leaves open a lot of interpretation. And I would say that more. One is, I hope that the rhetoric can be toned down. I don't want to see a continuation of the public confrontation. It doesn't serve either side. But there is a lot at stake, and I understand from Israelis' position how they see it, and I understand that this administration going out wants to create a context, about its what it did and why they're ending on the point that whereas they started out dedicated 8 years ago and 4 years ago to getting a peace process, but they don't say that the party that walked away, whether it was Annapolis, whether it was all the negotiations on all the opportunities, was the Palestinians. And that failure, it creates a one-sided thing and only then gets the Israelis even more. Why didn't they acknowledge the 10-month freeze that Netanyahu imposed on construction and settlement and got zero in return from the Palestinians?
Yes.
Why, when they mentioned Gaza, they did not mention that Egypt closed the crossings, not just Israel?
Yes.
That the security concerns that drove the closing of those, and he acknowledged that there are security threats that come out of the region. All I'm saying is that it left open too many wounds. It did not really heal in the way that I would have hoped it would. I think the references to Jerusalem, at least they had the UNESCO resolution in there and that reference, but still the damage done when you talk about Jerusalem as being occupied territory and the 3,800 years of Jewish history, et cetera, which UNESCO has undermined, now can be compounded if we talk about it in this context and the freedom of worship, which Israel is guaranteed, et cetera. We want to see a resolution. I would hope that there would be the opportunity for meaningful talks, but it will only come when the Palestinians get the message. You've got to sit down at the table or there's no future. You're not going to be able to meet the needs of your people. They should hold them to account, and the international community should hold them account. We keep giving a pass.
Malcolm, you know how much I appreciate everything you do for the Jewish community and also for me. Thank you for giving us more time. We'll continue the conversation, but thank you, my friend.
I have a feeling this is not over.
I know.
So you will have plenty of fodder for your shows for the next year, and I really appreciate your addressing this in a timely way. That people should step back, read the documents, understand it, make their voices heard, whatever their position, contact the elected officials that they should be coming out when you have a vote of 99-0 and 319-1 in the House, in the Senate and the House, respectively. That tells you that the Congress gets it. I think the American people, by and large, get it. But they have to be heard from.
Thank you. Very beautifully said, Malcolm. The thoughts of Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. We go from one giant to another. You've heard me talk about David Harris before, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, and somebody who speaks out eloquently in defense of both the State of Israel, the United States of America, and the principles of liberalism. David, thank you so much for joining us for a moment.
Hello, Mark.
So, David, were you able to actually watch Kerry's speech?
I saw it from beginning to end.
What was your David, I'm trying to understand what people were feeling inside their gut. What was your reaction?
Well, I actually, right after the speech, I sat down and wrote an open letter to Secretary Kerry, which I called Dear Secretary Kerry, and it was published on the Huffington Post. So your viewers may want to go directly to the Huffington Post or to the ajc.org website.
Very good.
And I've sort of laid it out in much greater detail than I can on your show,
Okay,
Mark.
but give me the summary.
Look, the summary is, unlike some, I don't view Secretary Kerry as somehow an adversary of Israel and the Jewish people, not at all. I think he's a friend, he's a proven friend, he's a committed friend. I happen to think on these issues he's going about it the wrong way, but I think it would be a terrible mistake to confuse the person and the policy. The person is a good, decent, patriotic, committed American and friend of Israel for 30 years or longer. The policy may be misguided, but I don't think it's out of malicious intent.
By the way, just so you know, David, I said the exact same thing at the top of the show. So
I'm sorry, I missed it, Mark.
No. You and I agree. Now I want to know what your reaction was within the context that you've just laid out.
Look, to me, the operative question in all of this is, for those who are committed to moving the peace process forward, does the vote on Friday or does the speech at the State Department now, does it get us closer to the goal or not? That's the operative question for me. And the answer for me on both counts, both the Friday vote and the speech today, is, in a way, it moves us further away. I know that was not the intent of Secretary Kerry, but I think it's the result of this and other things.
How so?
Well, because, look, number one, it legitimizes the internationalization of the conflict. It moves us further away, both literally and figuratively, Mark, from the only place where this conflict can be resolved, and that is the bargaining table for Israelis and Palestinians. No, not for Venezuela, not for China, not for Russia, not for Malaysia or France or the UK, but the Israelis and the Palestinians. And as long as the Palestinians believe they can avoid that table and they can go to the UN instead, and now they can even count on the abstention of the United States, which means that the resolution was not blocked, why in the world are they ever going to go to the bargaining table with Israelis? They're going to continue this process of avoiding the Israelis, being AWOL at direct talks, and trying to use the international community against Israel. Mm-hmm. So it moves us further away from the goal that I think many of us share, whether in Paris or London or Washington or here at AJC.
And what about the specific issue that was at the heart of Kerry's message, that ultimately the settlements do no good, and in fact, they impede the process and make it more and more difficult for the Palestinians to believe Israel is serious, or that there could ever be a contiguous, as he described it, a contiguous Palestinian state? What do you want Americans watching right now, JBS, to understand from you about the settlements?
Firstly, that yes, of course, obviously, Mark, settlements are an issue. When Israelis and Palestinians finally do sit down, they're going to have to talk about settlements, and they're going to have to talk about a lot of other issues as well, Jerusalem and borders and security and water and all the rest. That's not news. We know that. But the impression given today unfortunately, and I didn't exactly time every segment of the speech, but there's no question that way over 50% of the speech was devoted to Israel's responsibility and Israel's culpability. I'm guessing it was probably in the range of 70 to 75% of the time spent.
Yes.
That gives viewers a very skewed impression.
Yes.
The reality is, Mark, and you don't have to believe David Harris or AJC, go to the historical record. The reality is that every single attempt, going back to 1947, when the UN got involved in the first place, up until today, every single attempt to achieve a two-state agreement was sabotaged by the Palestinian side. Every single attempt. So, I mean, how can Israel want peace for the Palestinians more than the Palestinians want it for themselves? Mm-hmm. And that's the piece that was missing today. It's the piece that says, but Secretary Kerry, we've been down this road before. A two-state agreement very much along these lines was put on the table by Ehud Barak with Bill Clinton's support. It was put on the table by Ehud Olmert with George Bush's support. You tried in 2009 and 2010 a settlement freeze. Israel went along with it. What happened to all the history? You can't tell us that history doesn't matter. In this part of the world, history does matter. You're not being dropped by parachute into some kind of surgical laboratory here. There's a history to all of this. And the history says, unmistakably, Mark, that at the end of the day, the Palestinians have forfeited every chance for a two-state agreement until now. There's the core of the problem.
Yes.
Again, I'm saying, Mark, very clearly, settlements are certainly one of the issues.
Yes.
I'm not ducking that one.
Yes, I hear
but
you.
But the core of the problem, they won't sit down with the Israelis and discuss the issues in the only place it matters, in face-to-face talks.
By the way, one question as we end. David, if every settler was taken off the West Bank tomorrow, do you believe the Palestinians would come and make peace with the State of Israel?
I have no idea, because it could on the one hand encourage some to want to make peace. On the other hand, it could embolden many Palestinians to believe that now that they've accomplished that, the next goal is going to be the rest of Israel. I have no way of knowing. And the other thing, Mark, which wasn't discussed, is, you know, you could create a Palestinian state then and there if there were no settlers, perhaps, and who's to guarantee that the state will be around in a year or two or three? And what kind of a state, Mark? Is it going to be a state like Gaza run by Hamas? Is it going to be a collapsing state like Libya or Syria? What exactly is it going to be? And the Secretary tried to assure people that there are plans, that General Allen and others have all kinds of plans to ensure that this doesn't happen. Well, forgive me, it's the same Middle East that produced Libya and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan, just beyond the Middle East. So are we supposed to believe blindly in plans? This is the Middle East, for goodness sakes.
Yes.
And
David,
sometimes I think that even the best-intentioned people, and again, John Kerry is a well-intentioned person.
I believe you're right.
And I'd be the first one to speak up against any in the Jewish community who try to personalize this or vilify him.
Good for you.
It's not about him.
No.
It's good intentions, which in this case, I believe, went awry.
David, you say it so well, always, and it is always an honor to have you on. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. As we end Hanukkah and then end the year, may 2017 be a wonderful year for you and your family, and may it be a year you and I speak often.
Alavai.
Alavai.
It should only be.
You be well,
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to all your viewers.
Thank you. David Harris, CEO of the American Jewish Committee. It's interesting, by the way, as you hear Danny Ayalon, Malcolm Hoenlein, David Harris. We're going to have more for you after this quick break. None of them want to say they were infuriated. None of them want to even answer the question how they felt. And I understand it. You know, these are people who have to be very careful what they say in public. I don't have to be careful, so I can tell you. While I thought it was a very well-crafted, well-meaning speech, it infuriated me. We're going to take a quick break and then be back with more as JBS takes a look at the speech of John Kerry, reacting to and defending the American decision to exercise and to withhold exercising its veto of the UN Security Resolution, which basically has made every Israeli settlement illegal. We'll continue in a moment. Please stay with us.
Enjoy the excitement and panorama of Jewish life today on JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, featuring daily news from Israel, an array of Jewish studies, live Sabbath and holiday services, programs from the 92nd Street Y, and major event coverage, Jewish films, children's programming, and in-depth interviews with leading Jewish figures, all on JBS.
I'm Mark Golub. Thank you for joining us as JBS looks at the speech of John Kerry that happened today, Thursday, December 28th. And I am joined by someone now you know so well. I don't ever want to sit at this desk without Thane Rosenbaum on my right, in the law school at NYU and the director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society, also the author of many, many books, some fabulous Holocaust books, and also How Sweet It Is his latest novel. Thank you for coming out here again.
Of course, Mark.
By the way, it's no secret, because people may have seen you already. You were on CNN earlier today. CNBC.
CNBC.
What did they ask you?
Well, it's not like the Mark Golub show. Nothing is quite like the Mark Golub show if you care about truth and justice.
Okay.
It's also an alternative reality.
I just wonder what were they concerned with?
Well, to them, they sort of followed the party line. This is really about settlements. They're illegal. They've always been illegal. Why do the Israelis continue to live there? Don't the Israelis realize that if they continue to live there, there'll never be peace? Now, of course,
Israel's fault.
You never hear anything about Palestinian violence or incitement. At one point, I said, well, it's really also important to understand how the Israelis came to be on that land, because no one knows, right? I mean, the people that watch most of these networks, they can't even find Israel on a map. So for them to not even have the context, the background, and so I sort of had to, within my soundbite, had to push through the 3 prior wars. And this other idea that people forget, that in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, it took years of thinking that went into Resolution 242, where even someone like President Johnson was very clear in saying, I think he has that very famous line, we have parking lots in Texas that are wider than the thin neck between between West and East Jerusalem. And the idea was that there was some recognition that the land that was captured in 1967, not all of it was going back. And again, this too is missed. And by the way, this is what this resolution ignores, and is one of the reasons why everyone is so upset about it, because it forgets what Resolution 242 states, and it seems to say that everything, even pre-armistice, is illegal, it's occupied, and it belongs to the Palestinians, and Jews have no right to even be praying at the Western Wall. So that context, again and again, is missed, and I felt, even with John Kerry's speech, was again and again missed. The theme continues to be settlements put the two-state solution in jeopardy. That's his words.
Okay. Excuse me, fighting a little bit of a cold. Overall, your reaction to the fact that the Obama administration and John Kerry felt they needed to do this?
Well, my reaction is utter bafflement, because what they might have done is say, well, wow, we didn't anticipate this kind of a reaction. Even our Democrats who are our friends are objecting. I mean, if I was John Kerry, I would have called up Chuck Schumer and said, what should I say? I want to speak. Tell me what I can say that would make tikkun, some repair. Because obviously, the Jewish world heard this in a different way. But instead, I felt that what you saw here has made it worse. Minimize the abstention. I mean, the idea that, so what, we abstained. He said, quote, we didn't agree with everything that's in there.
Yes, he did.
But what he failed to say is there's a reason. It's, yes, of course you didn't agree with everything, but what's in there is so outrageous and so egregious. I mean, I actually thought, as a law professor, and you're going to have Alan on soon, I kept thinking as also as a law professor, it's shocking that President Obama actually read the text. Did he not read the text? Because the text is very clear. You and I did it on the show a few days ago. And this is the other thing that gets missed. People are commenting on Facebook about a resolution they haven't read.
Yes.
They think it means, oh, it's against the settlements. No, it's not. It goes far beyond being against the settlements. It's not that simple. People wrote things to me. I wrote something for the Times of Israel the other day. And, liberal Jews wrote notes to me expressing their anger at me for the essay, saying, God, I thought you wouldn't like the settlements. It's about the settlements. And not recognizing the language goes much farther than that.
Yes.
And certainly, among other things, not only does it reject essentially the principles of Resolution 242, it's very, very casual about Palestinian violence.
Absolutely.
It's not even a moral equivalence. It's not even equivalence.
Right.
Because violence is spoken of generically, as if it's Israeli violence. Who's the violent? We don't know. Incitement, who knows?
Both sides.
Both sides.
Both
When
sides.
it comes to violence, it's both sides. When it comes to settlements, the major obstacle is Israel's.
Well done. We have somebody else on the phone right now whom they just referenced. I love to have him on. Everybody tells me, by the way, no one is able to articulate the issues that are very complex in such a direct way, whether it has to do with the American scene, the Israeli scene. Alan Dershowitz, of course, who is professor emeritus of law at Harvard Law School, a prolific author. Alan, how many books have you written now?
35, and I'm about halfway through number 36, the case against BDS, the UN, and other Israel haters.
Very good. How did the book on Abraham go?
Good. People liked it because it's all about, Abraham being the first lawyer. I love going back and rereading the Torah differently from the way I read it when I was a yeshiva student.
Yes.
And reading it through the eyes of a lawyer, an older person, and getting even more insight, particularly from the book of Bereshit, which is my favorite book because it's not a law book. It's a book how people search for justice before there's a legal system. Exodus creates the legal system, the Aseret Debrot, the Ten Commandments, but Bereshit really doesn't have laws in it. It's just humans struggling for justice. So I love that book.
Okay. So I know you watched the speech.
I did.
I'm here now with Thane Rosenbaum. We've already had Danny Ayalon, Malcolm Hoenlein, and David Harris.
Sure.
But I'm very anxious to hear, as you heard the speech, Alan, what did you feel and what did you think?
Well, first let me say something that's going to alienate half your audience. Ready for that?
Yes.
Okay. I think that Kerry's speech and the resolution at the UN has a striking parallel with the Israeli hard right. Why? Because both claim that there's no difference between Jewish Jerusalem and Amona, or Jewish Jerusalem and the most extreme settlements on the West Bank. The very extreme right-wingers in Israel and in the United States claim that Israel has as much claim to Amona, or extreme settlements in the West Bank, as they do to the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. And that's exactly what this resolution says. There's no difference. But, of course, they turn it around, and they say Israel has no claim to Amona in the West Bank, and equally it has no claim to the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the access road to Mount Scopus, the Western Wall. So in some respects, this whole fiasco with the resolution at the UN and the Kerry speech emboldens and strengthens the hard right in Israel, exactly what they didn't intend to do. Mm-hmm. They didn't intend to strengthen the hand of Bennett, but they have said to Bennett, you're right. There is no difference between the extreme settlements in the West Bank and Jewish Jerusalem. We think they're all illegal. You think they're all legal. Now, people like me, on the other hand, take a very different view. I think that the claim to Jewish Jerusalem is 100% solid. Israel recaptured it from Jordan, who improperly captured it through military aggressive war in 1948, and then Israel recaptured it in a defensive war. That's not an occupation, that's a liberation. And I distinguish that from the extreme expanding settlements in the West Bank. So there are really two different worldviews about the areas outside the 67 borders, and I take a more moderate centrist view, and I think both the Obama and Kerry administration and Bennett take a more extremist view, each of which kind of supports each other. So I think that there are many bad things about this resolution about Kerry's speech, but the fact that it actually strengthens the arguments of the extremists like Bennett is one of the major vices.
Okay. It's a fascinating insight, and it's very helpful as we look at the situation as a whole. And again, I indicated you tend to bring enormous insight into whatever you discuss. Having said that, I just want you to go one step further. What bothered you then, not about the fact that there's an equivalency in some way between the far right and the far left, or the way in which Kerry stated it, in terms of the details of Kerry's presentation? What bothered you?
It was totally ahistoric and totally counterproductive. He equates the settlement building on the one hand to the use of terrorism and encouraging terrorism on the other hand, and the refusal of the Palestinians to recognize the 1947 Declaration of the UN. 47 Declaration says 2 states for 2 people. The Palestinians say no. Israel is not a state for the Jewish people. We'll never recognize it as a state for the Jewish people. And I think that's one of the major barriers to peace. Another one-sidedness is Kerry went into some detail about the poor Palestinian refugees. Of course, it was a self-inflicted wound. There wouldn't have been any refugees if all the Arab states had accepted the 1947-1948 UN resolutions and Israel's declaration of statehood. And then he left out the 700,000 Jewish refugees who have equal claim to refugee status as the Palestinian refugees. If there's going to be compensation for Palestinian refugees who left as a result of an aggressive war started by their brothers and sisters, then surely there has to be compensation for 700,000 innocent Jews who were forced out of North Africa, Egypt, forced out of Iraq, forced out of Iran, forced out of so many other parts of the Arab world. You have to have some sense of equivalence here, and the Kerry speech showed no equivalence at all. Fortunately, it doesn't matter. Let Kerry say whatever he wants. Let President Obama say whatever he wants. The only thing that matters is UN resolutions because they're irreversible. And I think I heard him say, I know I heard him say that the Obama administration would not recognize a Palestinian state absent a negotiation with Israel.
Correct.
And I thought the implication was that they would not introduce or support another UN resolution. If that's the case, then, Kerry's speech is about as significant as you and I speaking on this interview. It has no weight. It carries no import. And on the merits, it's not particularly persuasive. And as I wrote in a column that appears right now on the Fox.com, it will end up in the dustbin of history along with so many other unfair, one-sided condemnations of Israel. But what it poses is a great dilemma for people like me, liberal Democrats, who support the liberal democratic approach to women's rights and to gay rights and to gun control and to separation of church and state, who support the domestic agenda of the Democratic Party, but who can't support the foreign policy agenda of the Democratic Party. And I think the test is going to be, for me, if the Democrats appoint Keith Ellison to be the head of the DNC, and that's something that's being pushed by Senator Schumer, that, for me, will mark the end of my association with the Democratic Party. I will publicly resign from the Democratic Party and will continue to vote for who I think are the best candidates, and most of them will be Democrats, but I will no longer financially support, morally support, or politically support the Democratic Party as a party. I could not morally associate myself with a party headed by a man with his virulent anti-Semitic background. Any man who didn't know that Farrakhan was an anti-Semite when he worked for him for so many years is either an ignoramus, a fool, or a liar. And I don't think that Ellison is an ignoramus.
Okay. Alan, Thane has a question for you.
Alan, I know that another area that at least was troubling for me was that Kerry was very casual about the abstention versus the veto. And I know you feel strongly about this, and so do I. Can you speak directly about the significance of an abstention? To him, it was, hey, look, we didn't vote for it, we abstained, and then he casually said, well, we didn't agree with every word of it. And
if you don't agree, if you're the United States of America and you don't agree with every word of it, you veto it, or
right.
you threaten to veto it until you agree with every word of it. I can tell you this from firsthand experience. I worked with Justice Arthur Goldberg. I had been his law clerk. And he asked me to come work with him on Resolution 242 of the United Nations right after the 1967 war. And I actually came and stayed with him at the Waldorf Astoria and worked with him on every word. And I can tell you this, the United States and Great Britain would not have signed off on that resolution if the word "the" had been in it before the word territories, because the American position was Israel did not have to return all the territories captured in the defense of war. It just had to return territories, meaning some of the territories. And it was explicitly part of the policy that Israel would not return the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the Kotel, the access roads to Jerusalem, the Latrun area, return to the 9-mile wide, what was called the Auschwitz lines, but would instead create for itself defensible borders. So I know how an American administration could work on every word, and it's a scandal for me that the United States would not veto a resolution that it didn't agree with. And, I think if we sat down and were able to cross-examine, and I think there will be an opportunity to do that at congressional hearings that are going to be held, cross-examine Ben Rhodes and ask him or ask Kerry, do you really believe that when President Obama prayed at the Kotel and left a note that he was violating international law and stepping on territory that was occupied by Israel improperly in violation? If you do believe that, we should know that. And Kerry seemed to suggest that in his speech. But if you don't believe that, why did you abstain and allow to go through a resolution that essentially said that? My own belief, I know Samantha Power well. She was my student. She was a very good student, and she's a friend. I believe, I haven't spoken to her, but reading the text of her speech, that originally it was a speech which was planned to be given to justify a veto, because most of the time was spent on why the United Nations was not a proper forum for resolving these disputes about settlements. And then I think at the last minute, the president pulled the plug and said, no, there's going to be an abstention, which is the same as a vote for. The American ambassador in Israel had told people that there would be a veto, and so he was obviously told that. So I think this was a last-minute order from the President of the United States, and I think it was not a policy, but I think it was based on pique, anger, revenge, all the worst motivations that a president can have for not vetoing a resolution, which is going to set back the peace process enormously.
One last question for you, Alan. You have been, from the outset, way before it became fashionable, against settlements. I'm
against the settlement policy of Israel. I don't oppose the building of places like Ma'ale Adumim and Gilo.
Okay.
I think there will have to be, settlement exchanges of property. What I am opposed to is building settlements deep into the West Bank. I think Hebron is a very difficult issue. And the reason I call it Hebron, and the reason I often don't refer to it as the West Bank, but Yehuda and Shomron, is because I want the world to know what Israel is giving up when it compromises. But I think in the interest of peace, there have to be compromises. Hebron is going to be very difficult. It would be like asking the Catholic Church to give up the Vatican or asking the Muslim religion to give up the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hebron is as important, perhaps more important to Judaism than anything but Mecca and Medina are to Islam. But when Netanyahu got into office the first time, he was prepared to make compromises about Hebron, much to the regret of some people on the right. And so, compromises are going to be essential. So, yes, I've been opposed since 1973 to the building of settlements deep in the West Bank, but I'm not opposed to expanding the borders. In fact, I was a supporter of the Ayalon plan. I thought that in 1967, after 242, Israel should simply annex areas, not a lot, but areas of the West Bank without large populations, make them part of Israel, but not have settlers in areas that might very well become part of a Palestinian state.
I understand. Alan, it's always wonderful having you. You continue the fabulous work, and we will talk again often.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
The thoughts of Alan Dershowitz, whom you well know. And I wish this could go on forever, but it can't. So I want to get right now to one more individual to hear his thoughts. Eric Yoffie is President Emeritus of the Union for Reform Judaism. He's on the phones now. Eric, how are you?
I'm very well, Mark. How are you doing?
Good. Eric, did you watch the Kerry speech?
I didn't watch it, but I read it.
Okay. How did it make you feel? What was your reaction to it?
Well, I thought that you have to see it from two perspectives. I mean, on the one hand, it was a defense of the two-state solution. I think most of the speech was devoted to that, rather detailed, not particularly new. Most of the things have been said before. I thought that they were said very well. I thought it was a strong and compelling defense. Secondly, it was a defense of American diplomacy, and this was less successful because there are problems, as we've discussed before, with America's diplomacy and their decision to abstain rather than to veto the resolution in the UN and so forth. So I thought from that perspective, the case was not made particularly well.
Interesting. Thane Rosenbaum is with us as well. He has a question for you.
Eric, were you troubled at all, both in the resolution and even in Kerry's remarks, that we're not really speaking, we continue to use words like the settlements are a major obstacle to peace. Today he used the word settlements create, the two-state solution is now in jeopardy. But when it comes to Palestinian, the role that the Palestinians play in Palestinian intransigence, in nation building, Palestinian violence, incitement, the chanting of from the river to the Red Sea, teaching their children to hate Jews while Jewish children are taught math and science, very fundamental problems about the Palestinian society and its unwillingness to both build a nation and accept Israel as a neighbor. Are you disappointed, or do you see why there are people like me, Eric, who think that this is what the resolution really ignores, and this, by ignoring this, it appears to place primary blame on the settlement policy by the Israelis?
Well, the resolution did ignore those things, and as I've already mentioned, I was somebody who felt that the resolution should have been vetoed. So if you want to talk about the resolution, I mean, that's an appropriate issue to raise. Now, has Secretary Kerry discussed the questions that you've just mentioned before, and the fact he has many times, and I've heard him give some very passionate remarks on precisely those points.
So I heard him say different things
so
today.
I think it's important to acknowledge that those haven't been absent from the conversation. But I mean, obviously, they weren't the focus of the speech today.
I heard him say today, and the Palestinians have a talented, hungry, eager to work young workforce. That is not certainly belied by the experience in Gaza. There are reasons for people to be dubious and cynical about the Palestinians, quote, as he said, all they're really interested is fully ending the occupation. People that are really observing this are saying, well, that's not only what they're interested in. It appears that they're interested in more than that, because they've had many opportunities to end the occupation, and in each instance they walked away. That, too, was not addressed with John Kerry's speech today.
Well, look, as Mark has heard me say many times, I mean, we can discuss the Palestinians, legitimate, important, and so on. My approach to questions such as settlements, though, really doesn't have that much to do with Palestinian. In other words, the reason for Israel to have a more sensible settlement policy than what it has is because, first of all, that's Zionism, which promotes a Jewish and democratic state in the land of Israel, and because it's consistent with Jewish interests. So whatever the Palestinians do and do not do, very important question, does it serve Israel's interests to have a settlement policy like the one it has? And I would argue that no, it doesn't. So it's important, I think, to make these distinctions. No matter what the Palestinians are doing and what they believe, and I do not believe that they're ready for peace, and I've said that 100 times, that doesn't make Israel's settlement policy sensible or consistent with a Jewish and democratic vision of the state of Israel.
I understand your point, Eric, and I feel when we're on doing a round table, that's an absolutely important point for you to make, and viewers should understand it. That wasn't the context, though, of Kerry's speech. Kerry's speech was basically saying the reason there's no peace right now is the state of Israel is blocking it. And you've never said that, Eric. And you've been much more nuanced about your opposition to settlements. And I think that what Thane is trying to argue is, in this particular address, and what I said at the outset of this program, Eric, is it was a very seductive speech. I don't think Kerry was being anti-Semitic. I don't think he was being anti-Israel. I thought he believed every single thing he said, and he meant it for good. But it was so unsophisticated. It did not put the problem in any real context, and it equated violence and murder and terrorism with settlement building. And while I understand why I've said many times, I don't think there is anything illegal about them, there's nothing immoral about them, but they may not be wise. They are unwise because of the message they give. But to equate that with the kind of violence and death that is with rockets and tunnels and driving cars into people at bus stops, it's not appropriate. And if people did not have the larger context, when they listened to Kerry, they wouldn't be able to hear it as somebody, as you would, because you bring all of your knowledge to it. Most of the viewers in America have none of the understanding you have. That's what troubled me.
Well, it's perfectly appropriate to say it was not a comprehensive overview of the situation. The Palestinian side was not included in the words that we heard from Secretary Kerry today. So that I agree with. To the extent that I hear you saying that Secretary Kerry was equating settlement with murder, I think that's at the very least an overstatement, and I'm not sure how you're drawing that conclusion. He didn't give the other side that understands us to have, that enables us to have, as you said, a nuanced view of the broader picture. He was focusing on one particular issue, and you can be appropriately critical of that. But to suggest that he gave a wildly immoral view which says that settlements is the same as murdering people, he didn't say that, Mark. I read the words very carefully.
Okay, I will defend.
Not what I saw.
I'll defend myself. What he basically was saying was there are two problems here. On the one hand, you have settlement growth, and Israel has to address that. And then there was this very casual reference to incitement and violence, which occurs in one specific, actually in two specific articles of the resolution. It never, excuse me, Eric, it never uses the word Palestinian anywhere in the entire resolution. It only refers to Palestinian territory. So it blames Israel over and over again. Israel is illegal. It's in flagrant violation of international law. But nothing equivalent is said about the one thing Kerry points to as the Palestinian problem. There's an Israeli problem, and there's a Palestinian problem. What's the Israeli problem? Settlements. What's the Palestinian problem? Incitement, terrorism, and he doesn't ever use the word murder. So that if one is looking at where is the balance in Kerry's remarks, it's in this juxtaposition of settlements on the one hand and incitement, terrorism on the other. And I don't feel that that is a moral equivalency, and I wish one of two things. Either the Secretary had made a much stronger point about the evil of incitement and terrorism, or left that out and just said, look, I'm not talking about the two sides today. I'm talking about one problem. And the one problem, which really was the focus of his remarks, was the settlements.
Well, you and I aren't going to disagree about that. He was talking about settlements. And we have no disagreement about the inability of the Palestinians to see this issue in appropriate moral terms, to cease and desist from terror, to put murder behind them. All of that is true. I think what we need to see from the State of Israel, and we need to see from some people in the Jewish community, is all of that notwithstanding, as central as it is, we need some acknowledgement of the problem that settlements pose.
I understand.
We need that, and unfortunately, we need that from the government of Israel, and
yes, the question,
I think
though,
it's unfortunate that we haven't heard that. So let's not argue about what we agree on.
I understand.
My issue is in that area, the government Israel would be helping itself, helping its cause, strengthening its moral position if it could address some of those settlements.
Okay, and I think you say that all the time very, very well. The question is the last question. We have only 10 seconds. Was the United Nations Security Council the place where America should have made this point?
No.
That's all. By the way, Eric, I love you. I'm so appreciative you always come on. You always bring wonderful perspective. Keep writing, Eric, and we'll have you on often so that people get to hear your voice. I appreciate you very, very much.
Good talking to you.
Thank you.
That's right. Bye-bye.
I want to give you the last word, as I always give you the last word. It has to be 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, what's ultimately your sense of what this entire Kerry speech after the resolution, what does it mean? What does it say?
Look, it's very consistent with the Obama administration from the outset. Israel was a colonial power in that part of the world. The burden is always on it. We don't focus so much on the Palestinians. We infantilize the Palestinians. We treat the Palestinians as if everything that happens to them is purely reactive. They have no impulse control. They're not adults. It's Israel's fault. Everything that happens is because Israel has instigated it because of the settlements. So it's consistent with the kind of Obama philosophy. Yes, there's terrorism, but whoever. The real problem is Israel is behaving like an occupying power. The one thing that I would just want to say, as a law professor, Alan Dershowitz was here. President Obama was a law professor, and you were the one that first called my attention to the language of the resolution itself. And what I find most appalling, that a law professor actually read the resolution, actually read it, I have to assume he did, and didn't say, yeah, I don't like Bibi, I don't like the settlements, I don't even like Israel over Palestinians because I think it's really like white colonial Westerners. But I can't abstain from that because it so contradicts long-standing U.S. policy with regard to Israel and completely contradicts and undermines Resolution 242, that as a law professor, this thing just makes a mess of already a tangled situation. And that's the part that it was so casually done. That's why it feels venal. It feels retributive. It feels so anti-intellectual, immorally dishonest, both intellectually and immorally dishonest in light of the situation. Because if you read the language of this and says, you know, this thing really isn't, as you said, it's not really focusing on terrorism, it's not talking about violence, it's not even talking about how Israel even came to be in the position that it is now at all. And besides, many American administrations have supported 242, and Resolution 242 is very clear. The Western Wall, Western Jerusalem, the arteries that lead from the west to the east have to remain in Israel's control. And that's what happens when the Arab armies attack Israel 3 times. That's the consequence. Israel can't go back to that anymore. This resolution and what Kerry said today did not reinstate, said, look, there's a serious drafting error. That's what he should have said. There is a mammoth drafting error in this document because it doesn't speak to the reality that the Western Wall and Western Jerusalem belongs to Israel and always will.
Thank heaven for you. And thank heaven for you always being at my side.
Well, I'm always here for you, Mark,
Thank you.
and your audience.
Thane Rosenbaum, all the people who were on today, fabulous. He's the best. We got Alan Dershowitz, Eric Yoffie, David Harris, Malcolm Hoenlein, Danny Ayalon, all commenting on what is a critical moment in American-Israeli relations. You know, I'd love to hear any of your own thoughts. Please be in touch with me. We don't have time to put the address up on the screen. You know it. I thank all those who helped put this program together. No time to thank them, but I do thank you. Thank you for being part of the JBS audience. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.